Now that you have prepared your house for sale, are you wondering what to expect once your house is on the market? Can you stay in the house during showings? What happens once an offer comes in? What do you do after an offer has been accepted? There are so many questions that your realtor can answer for you if this is your first time or you haven't done it in a while. It can all be very overwhelming, so make sure you're asking them all the questions necessary to help ease your mind. If you're still at the stage of doing your research, hopefully by the end of this video, you'll feel more well-versed in what to expect. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sanaz Jewel, and I'm a local resident and residential realtor here in the lovely Caledonia, Ontario. First, showings. Depending on the market at the time that you list, be prepared for showings. I know this sounds like common sense, but what many people don't realize is preparing for showings isn't as easy as you think. You have to make sure your house is as clean as possible before every showing, and it looks as close as possible to the listing photos. This can be very frustrating if you have pets or kids, or both. If you're selling in a market where you'll likely have back-to-back showings, it might even make sense for you to pack up and stay with family or friends for a week. You'll also want to be as flexible as possible for showing times. Your goal is to sell your house, and if a buyer is having a hard time booking a showing, then they might just move on to the next one. Lastly, it's in your best interest to stay out of the house during showings. A buyer wants to comfortably be able to talk about the home and picture themselves in there, and they wouldn't be able to do that if you're standing right there. Next, offers. You have options when it comes to how you'd like to handle offers. You can either decide to hold off on reviewing all offers until a certain day or time, or you can have an offer presentation date, but be open to reviewing an offer before this date, which is called a preemptive offer, or you can accept offers anytime. Once an offer comes in, there is a time period the offer is valid until. This is called the irrevocable time. If you decide to accept offers anytime, sometimes agents will give a short time period to deal with it. So if you're at work or somewhere that makes it difficult for you to deal with it, you could potentially lose out on the offer. If your schedule isn't flexible, then it may be best for you to hold off on all offers until a certain date or time that you are available. Your realtor will go over all the options with you, and together you will decide on what works best for you and for the market that you're listing in. Deposits. Once an offer is accepted, whether it is conditional or firm, the buyer will be required to submit a deposit within 24 hours of acceptance. The deposit is held in the listing brokerage's trust account. The seller does not get the deposit. I've had a couple clients think the deposit goes to them, and it doesn't. If the offer is conditional and the buyer does not fulfill their conditions, a mutual release is signed and the deposit is returned back to the buyer without penalties. If the offer is conditional and the buyer fulfills their conditions, the deposit is held in the trust account at the listing brokerage until the deal closes and then applied to the transaction. If the offer is firm, again, the deposit is held in the trust account and then applied to the transaction on closing. If a deal firms up and then falls through after the fact, there is a chance that the seller can keep the deposit and other potential costs can be incurred by the buyer for breaching their contract. If it comes to this, it is dealt between the lawyers and the deposit is not released until directed by a lawyer or a mutual release is signed. If you haven't already done so, once your house is sold, you have to get a real estate lawyer to complete your transaction. If you don't know any lawyers, your realtor should have some recommendations for you to pick from. Walkthroughs. It is very common for offers to have buyer walkthroughs prior to completion. Typically 2, but sometimes more or less depending on what your realtor has negotiated on your behalf. These typically take about 1 hour and are meant for the buyer to do any measurements they need for renovations, maybe ordering new furniture. Sometimes they like to bring their family members with them to show them their new home. And the last walkthrough, which is about 1 to 3 days before closing, is meant to check all the major appliances, the condition of the home, make sure there's no damages, make sure there's nothing leaking or no holes in the wall, essentially that it looks exactly the same as when you purchased it. If there are any issues that can't be handled between the realtors, the lawyers will get involved and will adjust the closing date or funds accordingly depending on the outcome. So these are only some of the major details to consider once you've listed your home and after it has been sold. There are so many other little details that I'm sure your trusted realtor will guide you through. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my previous 2 videos about 5 things you need to know as a first-time seller and home updates on a budget about under $3,000. If you're looking to buy your first home or upsize from your first home and would like to find out more about Caledonia or other areas in Southwestern Ontario, you can reach out to me and I'd love to help guide you home.